$1,290, $13,524, $49,547, $96,876, $297,054, $907,777. Those are Eala's prize money totals for every single year she has been a professional tennis player. 6 seasons. Every qualifier, every ITF event in a town you have never heard of, every red-eye flight, every Grand Slam. All of it. Add them together and you get $1,366,000. Now here is the number that made me want to make this video. If she reaches the semifinals at the US Open in 2 weeks, she gets $1,450,000 for one afternoon. 6 years against one afternoon. And the afternoon wins by about $84,000. I know what happens next, because it happens every time somebody posts this comparison. The comments fill up with the same reaction. Tennis pays insane money. Athletes are overpaid. Look at this circus. I think that reaction is exactly backwards, and I think it is the single most misunderstood thing about this entire sport. That gap does not exist because the semifinal pays too much. It exists because those 6 years paid almost nothing. And they paid almost nothing by design. There is a reason a 15-year-old could win $1,290 for a full year of professional competition. There is a reason that number stayed brutal for 4 straight seasons. And there is a reason almost nobody who starts that journey ever gets to stand where Eala is about to stand. So here is what we are doing in the next 20 minutes. First, I am going to show you what those 6 years actually cost. Not what they earned, what they cost. Because those are 2 very different numbers, and only one of them ever makes it onto a chart. Second, I am going to explain why most of the talent in this sport never reaches the part of the ladder where money exists. It has almost nothing to do with how good they are. And third, I am going to answer the question that has been sitting underneath this whole thing from the first second. If 4 of those 6 years lost money, then somebody was paying. Flights, coaching, courts, physio, housing for a teenager 7,000 miles from home. That money came from somewhere. By minute 11, you are going to understand why that $1.45 million is not a reward for a good afternoon. It is a payment that came due 6 years late. But before any of that, I need to fix something in your head about what prize money actually is. Because everyone reading these charts, including most people who cover this sport for a living, is reading them wrong. Here is the thing nobody explains when they post these charts. Prize money is not salary, it is revenue. A professional tennis player is not an employee. She is a small business that travels for a living, and every dollar on that chart arrives before a single expense has been paid. There is no wage, there is no contract that guarantees anything. There is no team health insurance, no paid leave, no severance. Get injured in March, and the business earns nothing until you are healthy again, and the expenses keep running the entire time. So let me show you what actually comes out of that revenue. A full-time coach who travels with you. That is either a salary or a percentage of your winnings, usually somewhere between 10 and 20%, and often both. A fitness trainer. A physio. Because at this level your body is the entire asset and nobody else is going to maintain it. Flights for all of those people every week to a different country. Hotels, ground transport. Food that meets an elite athlete's requirements in cities where you do not speak the language. Rackets and stringing, which for a player hitting hundreds of balls a day is a running cost, not a one-time purchase. Entry fees at the lower levels. And then tax in every single jurisdiction you earn money in, which for a player crossing 15 borders a year is its own full-time problem. Now hold that against Eala's 2021 season. $13,524. For the year, one round-trip flight from Manila to Europe for 2 people, plus a week in a hotel, plus a coach's time, eats most of that. Not some of it, most of it. And this is not a story about one unlucky teenager. The governing body of this sport has published research on exactly this problem. And the finding is one of the most quietly brutal statistics in professional athletics. Only a few hundred women on the entire planet earn more from tennis than it costs them to play it. A few hundred. Globally. In a sport with tens of thousands of ranked professionals, everybody else is running at a loss. In public, on television, being described as a professional athlete. So who is the player we are actually talking about here? Alex Eala is 21 years old, left-handed, two-handed backhand, born in Quezon City in the Philippines. At 13, she left home and moved to the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, roughly 7,000 miles from her family, which is where she has trained ever since. She is currently ranked number 20 in the world. This season, she won her first WTA Tour title in Washington and reached the fourth round of Wimbledon, and when the draw is released, she will be seeded at a Grand Slam for the first time in her life. That is the version of her you see now. Rank 20, seeded, training on Arthur Ashe Stadium with cameras on her. But every single thing in that paragraph was purchased by the 6 years we just looked at. Years where the sport paid her a number that could not cover the cost of showing up. Imagine a career where you pay for the privilege of going to work for the first 5 years, and nobody can promise you that year 6 will be different. Not a discount. Not a small salary. You pay, and the only way to find out if it was worth it is to keep paying long enough to reach the other side. Most people cannot. That is not a character flaw. It is arithmetic. And if this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, the version where we actually open the books instead of reading a highlight reel out loud, that is the entire reason this channel exists. Subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it is the only thing that decides whether videos like this keep getting made. Because when you look at 2021 and see $13,500, you are not looking at a small paycheck. You are looking at a year that almost certainly cost more than it earned. And that was not even her worst one. Let's go through them one at a time. Not as a chart. As 6 years of somebody's life. 2020. $1,290. That is the entire professional earnings of Alex Eala for a calendar year. Not a month. A year. She was 15 years old, living in Spain, and the sport paid her less than the cost of the flight that got her there. Some of that is the pandemic. The calendar collapsed, tournaments vanished, nobody played. Fine. But here is the part that matters. The expenses did not collapse with it. The academy fees continued. The housing continued. The coaching continued. A year where the tour stops paying is not a year where a player stops spending. It is the worst possible combination. And she absorbed it at 2021, $13,524. Now ask yourself something. A competitive professional restrings rackets constantly, sometimes multiple frames per match, and a touring player will go through dozens of frames a season. Add stringing, add shoes, which at this level last weeks, not months. Before a single flight is booked, before a coach is paid, before a hotel room is reserved, what percentage of that 13,000 is already gone? Hold that number in your head. It gets worse. 2022, $49,547. And this is the year that should stop you cold. Because 2022 was not a bad year. 2022 was the greatest year of her teenage life. That September, Alex Eala won the U.S. Open girls singles title, first Filipino in history to win a junior Grand Slam singles trophy. Ever. She stood on a court in Flushing Meadows, holding a trophy that no person from her country had ever held, and the sport rewarded that entire season with $49,000. That is less than the average office salary in New York City, for a historic championship year. So here is the mini question. If winning a Grand Slam does not make a career financially viable, what exactly does? 2023. $96,876. This is the first year the number starts to look like a job. Almost 6 figures. Progress, real progress. But run it through the expense list from a minute ago. Coach, fitness, physio, 40 weeks of travel across multiple continents, hotels, tax in a dozen countries. $96,000 of gross revenue against a full professional touring operation is still, for most teams, underwater. Not by much, but underwater, 4 seasons in, 19 years old. A Grand Slam junior title on the shelf. And the business has never once turned a profit. 2024. $297,054. Finally. This is the first year that the math almost certainly works. 5 full seasons after turning professional, Alex Eala had a year where tennis paid for tennis and left something behind. Now let me put the whole thing next to the tournament we are actually here to talk about. From 2020 through 2023, 4 complete professional seasons, she earned roughly $161,000 total. At this year's U.S. Open, a player who loses her first-round match receives $140,000, losing on day 1 in under 2 hours. That single afternoon nearly matches 4 years of her career, and I want to be precise about why that comparison is not a joke about inflated prize money. Those 4 years and that one afternoon required the exact same thing from her. Full-time training, full-time travel, full-time sacrifice. The only variable that changed was which side of a ranking threshold she happened to be standing on. And the distance across that threshold is smaller than you think. 9 days ago in Cincinnati, Eala played Amanda Anisimova, ranked 10th in the world. She won the first set 6-4. Then she lost 4-6 and 2-6. 1 set away from beating a top 10 player at a WTA 1000 event. And there is no line on any chart that pays for 1 set. That is the whole system in 1 match. 2 or 3 games decide whether an afternoon is worth $140,000 or $480,000. Same player, same preparation, same 6 years of accumulated work behind it. So now we have the full picture of those 6 seasons. 4 years underwater, 1 year that broke even, 1 breakthrough, and a semifinal check waiting in New York that would erase all of it in 3 hours. Which leaves the question I ask you to hold on to. Somebody paid for those 4 years. The flights happened. The coaching happened. A 13-year-old girl lived and trained in Mallorca, 7,000 miles from her mother, for years, and none of that was free. That money existed. It arrived on time, every month, for the better part of a decade. It just did not come from tennis. And where it did come from is the reason Alex Eala is standing on Arthur Ashe Stadium this week instead of teaching junior clinics in Quezon City. The prize money ladder is not a reward curve. I want to be very direct about this because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It is a filter. Here is how the filter works. Tennis does not start paying properly until roughly the top 60 in the world. Below that line, the tournaments are smaller, the purses are thin, and the travel costs are identical. Above it, the money is real, and it compounds fast. Which means that to reach the part of the sport where you get paid, you have to survive 5 to 7 years in the part where you do not. And what decides who survives that stretch is not talent. It is capital. Let me give it a name, because the sport does not have one and it should. Call it the dead zone. Roughly ages 16 to 21. You are good enough to compete professionally, you are ranked, you are traveling, you are on the entry lists, and you are losing money every single month you keep going. The dead zone does not test whether you are good, it tests whether somebody can afford to keep you alive inside it. Now look at what got Alex Eala through hers. At 13, she received a place at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca. That is not a thing you buy with prize money at 13, because at 13 there is no prize money. It came through a program built to identify and fund exactly this kind of talent before the market will. She had corporate backing out of the Philippines from an early age, because a country with no tennis history suddenly had a reason to invest in one. and she came from a family with an athletic background and the structure to support an international move, her mother having competed for the Philippines as a swimmer. Every one of those things is external funding. Not one of them is tennis paying for tennis. So think about the latter differently. Imagine a toll bridge where the toll booth is at the entrance instead of the exit. On the far side, there is an enormous amount of money, and everybody can see it, and it is real. But you have to pay your own way across the entire bridge before you can touch any of it. Most people run out of money somewhere in the middle, not because they were walking too slowly, because the crossing costs more than they have, and the bridge does not care how fast you were. The people who make it across are, by definition, the people who could afford the crossing, which means the world rankings are not purely a list of who is best. They are partly a list of who could afford to keep going. And now go back to the title of this video. $1,450,000 for one afternoon. That is not a reward for a good afternoon. It is a deferred payment on a bet somebody placed when she was 13 years old. Those 6 years were never the years she earned very little. Those 6 years were the years she was paying the toll. Every unglamorous ITF event, every year in the red, every month somebody wrote a check that made no financial sense whatsoever. That was the crossing. The semifinal check is just the moment the sport finally settles up for a decade of work it never paid for at the time. And that reframes something that has bothered me about the way we talk about these numbers. We look at a chart like this, and we say the sport is broken because it pays too much at the top. I think it is closer to the truth to say the sport is broken because of what it fails to pay in the middle. The top is not where the damage happens. The damage happens at 19, in a hotel in some second-tier tournament city, when a genuinely world-class player does the math and realizes she cannot fund another season. That player does not appear in any statistic. She does not show up on a rankings list because she never got high enough. She does not show up in prize money data because she never earned enough to register. She just stops, and the sport never learns what it lost. So here is the question I actually want your answer to, and I am asking sincerely because I go back and forth on it. How many Eala are there in the Philippines, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in Nigeria, in Brazil, who were exactly this good at 19 and simply ran out of money in the middle of the bridge? Nobody knows. That is the entire point. Put your answer in the comments, because I read them, and this specific question is one I genuinely want to see argued out. Now, I know how all of this sounds. It sounds like a theory, and theories are cheap. Anybody can build a narrative around 6 numbers on a chart. So let me put 3 pieces of hard evidence against it, including one number from this year that I have not seen a single person in tennis media connect to any of this. If I am wrong about the filter, the evidence will say so. Evidence 1. The tournament itself has quietly admitted the filter exists. Look at where the 2026 money actually went. The US Open announced a total pool of $108 million this year, the largest purse in the history of tennis, and the first Grand Slam ever to cross 9 figures, a 20% increase in a single year. But they did not spread it evenly. Watch the shape of it. First round singles, up 27%, from $110,000 to $140,000. Qualifying, up around 15%. The runner-up, 12. The champion, 10. Every round rises less than the round beneath it. The deeper you go into this tournament, the smaller your raise was. And then there is the piece almost nobody covered. Alongside the prize money, the USTA seeded a brand new player support program with $2 million, split evenly between the men's and women's sides, aimed at players navigating mid-career life events and the transition out of the sport. Read that as what it is. That is not prize money. That is a safety net. You do not build a safety net under a pyramid unless you already know the bottom of it is breaking. Evidence 2. This is not a one-year gesture. It is a decade-long correction. 10 years ago, the singles champions at this event took home 18.3% of every dollar paid to singles players. In 2026, that figure is 12.9%. The winner's slice has been shrinking for 10 consecutive years, while the money underneath has been climbing. That is not generosity, and it is not an accident. That is a sport slowly conceding that its own distribution model was strangling the exact population it depends on to produce future champions. They did not fix it because it was unfair. They fixed it because they were losing people. Evidence 3. Eala's own curve accelerates at precisely the moment she clears the dead zone. 96,000 in 2023, 297,000 in 2024, 907,000 in 2025. Triple, then triple again. Now be honest about what that curve is measuring. Alex Eala did not become 3 times better at tennis in 2024 and then 3 times better again in 2025. She improved, obviously, substantially. But nobody triples their ability twice in 24 months. Nobody in history. What changed is which side of the bridge she was standing on. The same forehand, in the same conditions, against a similar opponent, is worth roughly 10 times more once your ranking clears the threshold where real tournaments admit you. The talent curve is smooth. The money curve is a cliff. And the cliff is the filter. Now put her against her own peer group, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. Players ranked between 15 and 25 in the world typically earn somewhere between $1 and $2 million in prize money in a single season. That is normal for that neighborhood. Unremarkable. Which means Alex Eala's entire first 6 years as a professional, all of it, every match from age 15 to 21, adds up to roughly 1 average season for a player at her current ranking. Same human being, same work ethic, same hours on court, different position on the bridge. So here is the prediction that falls out of this, and I am comfortable making it regardless of what happens in New York. 2026 is going to exceed her entire first 6 years combined, with or without a deep U.S. Open run. She has already won a WTA title in Washington and reached the 4th round of Wimbledon. The dead zone is behind her permanently. It cannot come back for her, and that is the actual milestone of this season, not any single check. And now, for whoever is still here, the part that no tennis channel will put in a video. That $1,450,000 is not $1,450,000. A foreign athlete earning money in New York pays United States federal tax on it. Then New York State takes its share. And New York State is famously aggressive about visiting athletes. Then the coaching percentage comes off, commonly 10 to 20%. Then the team costs for 2 weeks in Manhattan in late summer, at Manhattan late summer prices, for a traveling group of 3 or 4 people. Run the semifinal check through all of that, and what actually lands in her account is commonly somewhere near half. Nobody puts that in a thumbnail because it ruins the thumbnail. But here is why I am telling you anyway. Even at half, even at a third, it would not matter. Because if Alex Eala reaches that semifinal, she becomes the first Filipina in the history of the sport to stand on that stage. And nobody has ever figured out how to put a number on being first. Which brings us all the way back to where we started. 1 afternoon against 6 years. And now that you know what those 6 years actually were, I want to give you the real answer to the question in the title. Because it is not the answer I expected when I started pulling these numbers. So, the answer. Yes. 1,450,000 beats 1,366,000 by about $84,000. 1 afternoon outweighs 6 years, and the arithmetic is not close enough to argue about. But here is what changed for me while I was building this. Those 6 years do not lose that comparison. Those 6 years are what bought the afternoon. There is no version of this where the 1.45 million exists without the 1,290. The bad years are not the setup to the story. They are the purchase price. Every underwater season, every ITF event in a town with no cameras, every month somebody kept funding a teenager who had not yet proven anything. That was the down payment on the seat she is about to sit in. And that is why I do not think this is a video about tennis being overpaid. It is a video about how expensive it is to become someone the world eventually agrees to pay. Now zoom out, because there is a bigger consequence here, and it has nothing to do with her bank account. If the filter is real, and I think the evidence says it is, then every single time somebody crosses that bridge from a country that has never produced a professional, the sport gains something it cannot manufacture on its own, a market that did not exist. Before 2025, tennis was commercially close to invisible in the Philippines. No Grand Slam, no WTA 1000, no history of anybody reaching the second week of anything. Then one 20-year-old won a match in New York, and something broke open. In Melbourne this January, she was scheduled on Court 6, a side court. The queue to get in stretched back toward Rod Laver Arena. Every seat taken, every ledge, every inch of standing room, chants of "Let's go, Alex" loud enough that the umpire had to keep asking for quiet. She lost that match, and she still needed a security escort to get off the grounds. That crowd did not come from tennis marketing. It came from one person surviving a bridge that most people do not survive. So the real question underneath all of this is not what Alex Eala earns in New York. It is how many more of her the sport can actually afford to let across, and what it costs everybody when it cannot. Her seeding is announced Thursday. The main draw begins August 30th. The moment that bracket goes public, I am breaking down her exact path through it, which quarter she lands in, every seed standing between her and that semifinal rung, and the honest probability of her getting there. If you want that the day it happens instead of a week later when everyone else catches up, subscribe now, because that video is going out within hours of the draw. And leave me your number in the comments. Not the prize money. The round. How far does she actually go in New York? I have a number in my head that I think most of you are going to argue with, and I would rather see your answer before I say mine. $1,290 in 2020. A 15-year-old, 7,000 miles from her mother, playing a sport that had never produced a professional from her country. Everything on the table this month exists because somebody kept paying for that year when it made absolutely no financial sense at all.